Uh, Thank you so much for joining this session. The Social Theory Network is hosting the third session of its webinar series, Public Sociology and Global South. This session is basically dedicated to honoring the life and work of a great sociologist and public intellectual, Professor Michael Burawoy, who was killed by a tragic road accident on February 3rd, 2025. Professor Michael Burawoy was more than a scholar. He was a teacher, activist, and champion of social justice. His career spanned 5 decades, starting with his fieldwork in Zambia's copper mines in the late 1960s, where he used ethnography and marginalized theory to understand how post-colonial economies exploited workers. From Zambia to Chicago, Hungary, and the former Soviet Union, Professor Michael always grounded his theories in the everyday struggles of working people under different political and economic systems. His books like Manufacturing Consent and The Politics of Production become foundational texts in labor sociology. But his biggest contribution was the extended case method, a way of using ethnography not just to describe the world, but to challenge social theory and imagine possibilities of social change. What set Burawoy apart was his belief that sociology should not only interpret the world, but help transform it. As the president of American Sociological Association and International Sociological Association, he pushed for a more democratic and globally connected sociology to amplify voices from the global south and breaking down barriers in knowledge production. His call for public sociology inspired countless sociologists to collaborate with social movements, community organizations, and everyday people fighting for justice. His teaching left a lasting impact on generations of students, guiding more than 80 PhD students and memorizing hundreds of students' names each semester. His work reminds us that sociology is not just an academic pursuit, it's a practice of solidarity, empathy, and hope. Even in his passing, Professor Michael Burawoy leaves behind a powerful legacy, one that calls on us to use knowledge as a tool to build more just and equal societies. This section is not only a tribute to his life, but an invitation to carry forward his vision of public sociology in the global south and beyond. This session brings together scholars, activists, and public intellectuals to reflect on how sociology can connect with social movements, challenge dominant ways of producing knowledge, and contribute to social transformation. Now, to discuss more about Professor Michael and his work, we have three distinguished guests with us. Let me introduce you, our guest, Professor Millie Thayer. Professor Millie Thayer is an emeritus professor of sociology at UMass Amherst. She is basically known for her work on transnational feminism, social movement, and Latin American politics. Her research examines how feminist movements navigate so global inequalities, particularly the relationship between local activism and international aid. She is the author of Making Transnational Feminism, Rural Women, NGO Activists, and Northern Donors in Brazil, and has co-edited several volumes on feminist politics and globalization. Through her ethnographic work, Professor Thayer highlights the complexities of feminist solidarity across borders, linking gender justice with global social movements. I welcome you, Professor Thayer, to join this session. We have Professor Fareen Parvez with us today. Professor Fareen Parvez is an associate professor of sociology at UMass Amherst. Her specialization is basically political sociology, sociology of religion, depth, gender, and ethnography. Her research explores how marginalized communities navigate systems of exploitation and oppression across different contexts. She has conducted in-depth ethnographic work among Muslim and Dalit communities in India, Muslim neighborhoods in France, and faith healing practice in Morocco. Her award-winning book, Politicizing Islam, The Islamic Revival in France and India, examines how social class and state secularism shape Islamic movements in secular democracies. As a committed public sociologist, she writes on issues of debt justice, racialized inequality, and mutual aid, linking scholarship with social movements and grassroots struggles. I welcome you, Professor Fareen, as well. We have Dr. Shahadat Hossain, who is basically you know, uh, I would say, the pioneer thinker who is working for global sociology, and he is basically an advocate for social justice, not only in Bangladesh but also across the world. Dr. Shahadat Hossain has been teaching at universities in Australia and Bangladesh for 25 years. He is also currently pursuing his professional legal training in the Faculty of Law and Justice at the University of New South Wales, Sydney. Previously, he completed his Juris Doctor from the Faculty of Law, University of Technology, Sydney. He also completed his PhD in Sociology at the University of New South Wales. He is the author of Urban Property in Bangladesh, and currently he is working on his new book on law and urban justice. He is the founder of Social Theory Network. I welcome you, Professor Hossain, to this event. So this session is basically divided into two sessions. In the first session, each panelist will get 20 minutes to talk about Professor Michael, public sociology, and how they connect theory with practice. Then we will have a 15 minutes Q&A session. I thank you all for joining to this session. Now I would like to invite Professor Millie Thayer to take the floor.
Thank you so much, Shams. It's really an honor to be here. And it reminds me once again how Michael connected with people all over the world. And I feel honored to be part of this community of people who knew him, who read his work, and who are continuing to try to fight for social justice around the world. This has been a difficult month for all those of us who loved Michael. So forgive me if there are moments where it's a little difficult for me to speak. There's too much to say about him, and I'm hoping each one of us will share our memories and from different angles. So I'll tell you what I want to talk about is I'm going to leave to others to speak about his many intellectual contributions. And what I want to do is give you the perspective of a graduate student who I worked with him for many years, more years than probably he wished. I was still writing my dissertation. But I want to talk about my personal experiences with and observations of Michael as a teacher, a mentor, an ethnographer, and an activist. So just to give you a little background on where I was coming from before I met Michael, I had been living and working in Nicaragua during most of the decade of the 1980s in its early revolutionary period. When the Sandinistas lost the elections in 1990, it was a shock to me and most other observers. And I concluded that my ability to understand what was going on beneath the surface was sorely lacking. So I decided to go to graduate school and find out what I'd been missing. Just like that, Bob's your uncle, as Michael used to say, I landed at UC Berkeley. I was what they euphemistically called a returning student, meaning older, and with an activist identity and only a very vague idea of what sociology was. I had been a political science major, and sociology I didn't have much experience with. I discovered Michael Burawoy when I took the required methods class from him. It was actually not so much a smorgasbord of the different techniques that sociologists use, but a rigorous course in epistemology. We read theorists from Kant to Kuhn and Dorothy Smith to Foucault, reading them for the relationships between theory and data that lay behind their arguments. Most of it went right over my head, but Michael's passion for the sociological enterprise drew me in, and the intellectual challenge was thrilling. After that, I took every class he offered. Michael was legendary as a teacher. He was, as Shams mentioned, capable of keeping a class of 300 undergraduates in rapt attention to his lectures on Marx, and then engaging them in animated conversation, during which he could and would call on any one of them by name. His graduate courses were also always oversubscribed. They were all characterized by the intense demands that he made of himself and the commitment he expected in return from his students. He was never one to just dust off an old syllabus and change a reading or two. For example, for political sociology, which was a 2-semester class, he created a brilliant new structure organized around dialogues between Gramsci and a series of classical and contemporary theorists. He wrote original lectures, and this class met twice a week, typed them up, and handed them out to us. It was the equivalent of writing a new conference paper for every class. There was no way to just sit back and listen either. He demanded our critiques of his lectures and our engagement in discussion, insisting we root our claims in the text and defend our arguments. Most, if not all, of Michael's students were ethnographers, and many, including me, took his year-long participant observation seminar. Michael had encountered ethnography during his MA studies at the University of Zambia a few years after the country's independence. He studied with a member of the Manchester School of Ethnography who had helped to develop what was known as the extended case method. Through his own work as an ethnographer of labor, Michael modified the method and popularized it within sociology, which, just a side note, that was a huge accomplishment at a time when quantitative methods were revered and qualitative methods were viewed as not rigorous, not worthy of attention. So he made a huge contribution to resuscitating rigorous qualitative methods. Michael was not a fan of theory for theory's sake, to say the least, although he was a theorist. The point of theory for him was to enable us to understand the social world so that, as Shams pointed out, we could change it. The crux of the extended case method is the dialogue that ethnographers engage in between theory and the empirical world. The method demands that the ethnographer be reflexive, that they recognize that the world doesn't just lie out there waiting for us to discover its inherent meaning. Rather, the very way that we see the world is always shaped by our explicit or implicit assumptions, theoretical or otherwise. Ethnographers using this method consciously begin with a theory that seems like a good fit to explain what might be going on in the field. Then they go to the field looking not to impose the theory on what they observe, but rather to find its limits, What is it that it cannot explain in the field site? And then to use that insight to go on to reconstruct a theory, to extend it or stretch it in new ways. Ethnographers using, this whole process can involve a lengthy zigzag from theory to field and back again as you search for the right theory to reconstruct and define the way your data stretches it. It's a process that can drive a graduate student crazy. The goal, though, is to build new theories that emerge from the interaction between the messiness of the empirical world and pre-existing conceptual frameworks. Michael managed to instill in us at least a glimmer of hope that we would find the holy grail of an argument through this process. And armed with that hope, I embarked on an ethnographic dissertation project on feminism in Brazil. The highlight of my graduate school experience grew out of a dissertation group that Michael organized in 1998. He had so many students that the only way to manage was to bring us together. One year, he told me he was chairing an astounding 17 dissertations. Many of them, like our large contingent of feminists, were not exactly in his field of expertise. So it required a lot of work for him to advise us. He would hold, for this dissertation group, he would hold weekly potlucks at his apartment in Oakland and have students take turns sharing their work and getting comments from the others as well as from him. I was one of the oldest members of the group, but I felt like one of the babies, being probably the least far along in my project, with only a month or so of field work under my belt when we started. So for that reason, I think this experience had a huge impact on the way I thought about my research. A couple of years ago, when we had a retirement celebration for Michael, I reread many of the multi-page, single-spaced emails he sent me and other members of the group, offering specific comments on every incarnation of our papers, probably written when he was at the brink of utter exhaustion and exasperation. Every message was full of enthusiastic praise for what we had accomplished since the last draft, with lots of, words like brilliant thrown in here and there. But this was usually followed by, now look, which led into some stern injunctions and a roadmap toward a paper that actually held together. Not until afterwards did you realize that in between the brilliance and splendids he used in his comments, he was basically asking you to rewrite the whole damn thing. And asking us to make our timid hypotheses into what he called bold conjectures. But there was something about the way he took our work so seriously, situated himself so patiently in the minutiae of our field work. And I think we all know, those of us who have advised students, how difficult that can be. And he had this certainty that there was an argument somewhere in that impenetrable thicket of data. And he managed to give us confidence that we might actually have something important to say after all. The group met for 2 years every week. Some of the time I was in Brazil, other people were in Hungary. We came and went. We didn't have Zoom, so it was all on email. Early on, Michael suggested we write a book together. And since we were working in so many parts of the world, why not take the opportunity to theorize global processes? we, of course, agreed. And we read the new globalization theory together, people like Manuel Castells, and we built a conceptual framework that could hold all of our disparate projects together. And we wrote papers in dialogue with the theories that we had read. The outcome was an edited volume that he insisted we be listed as co-editors of, entitled Global Ethnography. And he wrote the introduction and a concluding chapter. That experience set the direction of my career. It taught me how to write an academic essay. It helped me move from some vague ideas about global feminism to theorizing power-laden transnational connections among social movements north and south. Michael also introduced us to the pleasures and challenges of collective intellectual work. We had to learn how to make ourselves vulnerable to feedback from peers, learning that critique is about making us better rather than simply an exquisite form of torture, as it sometimes appears. Michael modeled what he required of us, also asking us to comment on his own work. And he always let us know when we taught him something. That was something that always amazed me. How could we possibly be teaching him anything? He was, in our view, all-knowing. The process involved constant, time-consuming, often difficult emotional and intellectual labor, despair as well as elation. In one email to the group about a draft I had sent out for comments, I wrote, "I'm hoping this lost feeling is more about Moses in the desert than Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill. No doubt you will all help me find the sociological promised land." With the support of the intellectual community that Michael brought together, I found a secular approximation. I also went from thinking of academic work as a lonely endeavor to a career of creating collaborative writing relationships across disciplinary, geographic, and activist academic boundaries. Looking back, it was an incredibly bold conjecture on Michael's part that we could actually pull off a book together. That we did so is testimony to his stubborn insistence that we could, and to his tireless efforts to cajole, badger, and inspire our sometimes fractious little band of dissertators. The miracle is that it didn't drive him mad. To quote him in an email about the reviewer's comments on our book submission, "If the response of the reviewers is any sign, then our book should arouse interest. All that angst and fury will have been worth it." And it most definitely was. Before I conclude, I want to say a few things about a part of Michael that I was much less aware of as a student. I was humbled by his brilliance, drawn to his kindness, amazed at his capacity for tireless teaching and generous mentorship. I knew that he always had our backs, and I knew many examples of the ways he fought for his graduate students. And I knew he was sympathetic to the social movements that many of us studied and participated in. But I always saw him as more of a bookish intellectual than a street-savvy activist. However, it turned out that he was putting his commitments to work in more concrete ways than I had imagined, and he continued to do so throughout his career. Over a decade, he held leadership positions in the faculty union, defending the rights of lecturers and graduate students, as well as professors. He also worked to expose the corporatization of what he and his students co-authors in a 2024 article called The Extractive University. The photos of him with a bullhorn in hand at a rally or teaching his theory class on the steps of a building that the students were occupying are testimony to his labor activism. His intellectual collaborations with scholars from the Global South before and during his time as leader of the International Sociology Association had the political impact of decentering the global North within sociology, and his call for public sociology during his presidency of the American Sociological Association inspired students and scholars throughout the discipline to think about their work in a new way. In October 2023, he helped lead the Sociologists for Palestine campaign within the ASA, and he left behind unfinished work comparing apartheid in South Africa and in Palestine. In conclusion, I want to share a few short quotes from other students of his, because this, I want to convey that this was not just my idiosyncratic experience. In fact, Fareen and I have talked about how so many of the tributes, repeat one another. I mean, there was so much consistency to how he was in the world. The first quote is from Eric Kleinenberg. I don't think anyone has ever loved sociology more than Michael Burawoy. I know that no one has ever loved their students more or done so much to bring them together into the kind of community every scholar wants. Cynthia Solari echoes this, saying, the biggest gift Michael gave to his students was each other. And finally, Ruth Milkman, writing in Jacobin magazine, said, he understood that many of those attracted to graduate school in sociology wanted not only to gain academic credentials and jobs, but first and foremost to understand and change the world. He created space in the discipline for us and helped legitimate our work against the dominant currents in the field. The time, this is me again, dedication and love Michael gave to working with his more than 80 graduate students, as well as his collaborators, like some of you, interlocutors, colleagues, and comrades, enriched us all and left us with an impossibly high set of standards for what it means to be an intellectual, a mentor, an activist, and a friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Millie, sharing your thoughts, personal journey, intellectual journey with Michael, who has definitely helped the audience to know more about Michael. Now I would like to request Professor Fareen Parvez to take over the session.
Hi everyone, and in Ramadan Mubarak to everyone who participates. It's also an honor for me to be part of this panel, and I've known Millie for I guess about 15 years now, and we've often joked that she's my big sister. We've had a wonderful personal friendship and a teaching collaboration that originates with Michael. So thank you, Shams, for inviting me to be part of this event. Michael Burawoy was my PhD advisor, was in my life from 2001 until now. So it was a rich and wonderful dialogue over 24 years. My last email to him was just a few hours before I learned of his passing. So it's both painful, but also very heartwarming to help honor his legacy in different ways. And this event is especially meaningful because I think reaching across national divides was so important to Michael from the start. And then through his work with the International Sociological Association and his extensive travels to meet sociologists where they were across the world, especially in the last 15 years. So that, I'm going to be repeating a few things. Michael had about 80 graduate students whose dissertations he chaired. Many came to him because of their interests in labor or the former Soviet Union and post-communist transition, and many others because of his support for ethnography, global comparative work, and or his Marxist approach to sociology and to the world. I'm in that latter category, which also means that I didn't really engage a lot of Michael's empirical work. And I'm now in the process of discovering it and reading as much of it as I can. I'm starting with his work on Polanyi, third wave marketization, and a bit on gender and survival strategies in the post-communist transition, trying to apply these things to my work in India. And every time I do go back and read Michael's writings, I'm struck by the poetry that's embedded in how he wrote. The passion that he communicated in real life is very much there on the page. So as an ethnographer, Michael worked as a machine operator, a radial drill operator, which I'm not even sure what that is. He worked in a rubber factory, a champagne factory, and in a furniture factory way up in the Russian Arctic, where I used to joke with him that I wanted to visit. Michael's early work was about race and class in the copper mines of Zambia. He wrote about the bases of how workers consent to their own exploitation in the American factory, production processes and the different state interventions and ideological regimes that sustain them, actually existing socialism in Hungary, and the Soviet transition to capitalism. He had a sustained engagement with Polanyi and the changing nature of counter movements, and an elaborate and years-long engagement with Bourdieu, and more recently, the sociology of Du Bois and the larger project of decolonizing the sociology canon. He wrote a good deal on ethnography, and my favorite book, The Extended Case Method, which Millie referenced, and of course on reconstructing Marxism. Michael also wrote critiques of the neoliberalization of the university, racial capitalism in South Africa, and finally, among his last projects was his commitment to Palestine, understanding it as a case of settler colonialism, drawing out a comparative analysis with apartheid South Africa, and above all, galvanizing and reminding American sociologists of our moral responsibility to speak out to reduce the suffering of Palestinians. I want to read just a few short passages, and I'm going to be doing that a little bit throughout my comments, to share the poetry of his writing. So this is from Extended Case Method, page 31. What is positive science? For Auguste Comte, sociology was to replace metaphysics and uncover empirical laws of society. It was the last discipline to enter the kingdom of science. But once admitted, it would rule over the unruly, producing order and progress out of chaos. Thus, positivism is at once science and ideology. In that same opening chapter of the book, he writes, in the view of reflexive science, intervention is not only an unavoidable part of social research, but a virtue to be exploited. It is by mutual reaction that we discover the properties of the social order. Interventions create perturbations that are not noise to be expurgated, but music to be appreciated, transmitting the hidden secrets of the participants' world. And this is from what I believe is a forthcoming piece, probably one of the last things that he was writing on Palestine. Is there not something special that warrants our support for the Palestinian cause? Perhaps the ongoing massacre of Palestinians is the most egregious, the most barbaric atrocity of all. It takes place live on our screens. It is in our face. It is inescapable. The unconditional support of Western powers on the side of Israel gives it world historical significance. For a sociologist, it is not enough to declare whose side you are on and then move on. As sociologists, we embed our political commitments within a theoretical framework. In a period of post-coloniality, the systematic and transparent repression of Palestinians by the Israeli state makes it unique, compelling us to re-examine our own past, giving new salience to settler colonialism as the debris of decaying empires. So these were just three out of, countless passages that I think are just as beautiful. I'm going to read a few lines from Zach Levinson's tribute that was published on the Verso website that I think is a lovely summary of Michael's relationship to sociology. And Zach was one of Michael's students. He wrote, quote, "No one loved sociology as much as Michael Burawoy. Yet, there was also a way in which sociology remained his lifelong foil. Marx was not a political economist, but a critic of political economy. Gramsci wasn't a political scientist, but a critic of political science. Michael had much the same relationship with sociology. Sociology, he used to argue, emerged as a response to Marxism. And so, while it often appeared as if Michael loved sociology, I actually think it was the critique of sociology that he loved so much." And I think that's right in my experience, and it's certainly how I learned to think through Michael. It was by constantly comparing different theories, placing them in dialogue with each other in a relationship of mutual critique, with the dialogue with Marx as the anchor, that we keep building and sharpening our understanding of power and social change. So I'll now share a bit about Michael's influence on me and my work, and then I'll say a few things about public sociology. So when Michael retired in 2023, I wrote some reflections alongside his other students, and I'm sharing a small piece of that here. I started graduate school in September 2001. 2 weeks later, Congress voted to invade Afghanistan, and the world would never be the same. I remember Michael's Sociology 101 lectures in those early weeks, where he boldly critiqued the impending war and brilliantly got a lecture hall full of students to think critically about 9/11 and its aftermath. And this is at a moment when American nationalism was at an all-time high. I knew then that I was at home. Within a couple of years, Michael was carving out the public sociology agenda, and the excitement and energy around this was palpable and shaped my remaining years in graduate school. As Michael wrote in For Public Sociology in 2005, many of the 50 to 70% of graduate students who survive to receive their PhD sustain their original commitment by doing public sociology on the side, often hidden from their supervisor. End quote. Today, while I don't have a supervisor per se, it's indeed public sociology on the side that has sustained me. Michael's influence today on my thinking is subtle, but deep and unshakable. My work on religion and madness in Morocco reflects what I learned through him about Fanon's psychoanalytic work in Algeria and the sociological roots of trauma. My research on household debt in India takes me back to my first love of Marxism that he nurtured. Indeed, Michael's Marxism was my sanctuary. So I gravitated to Michael not only because of his intellectual and personal charisma, but because I saw alienation in class and everything I was studying, whether it was how people thought about the pornography industry, which was my MA thesis that Michael served on, to types of political mobilization among Muslim minorities, which was my dissertation that he supervised and my eventual book. Michael encouraged me in my ethnography to avoid the hegemonic sites of power and global cosmopolitanism, and to focus instead on more marginal cities in my field sites of France and India. So I ended up studying Lyon in southeastern France and Hyderabad in South India. And I'm so thankful for this, to have lived and learned in the margins. Through Michael, I learned to think analytically, and when I'm stuck in my ability to form an argument, I go back to the 2x2 tables that he was so fond of, and often find the clarity and the sharpness that are otherwise so elusive. Michael, of course, shaped my understanding of ethnography, grappling with profound ethical questions and power relations in the field while I was studying subaltern Muslim communities, and continue to study subaltern communities in India. I knew Michael was with me in spirit, and I quoted him in my methods appendix in my book. This is again from the extended case method of Michael, quote, "On whomever side we are, managers or workers, white or black, men or women, We are automatically implicated in relations of domination. As observers, no matter how we like to deceive ourselves, we are on our own side. Our mission may be noble, broadening social movements, promoting social justice, challenging the horizons of everyday life, but there is no escaping the elementary divergence between intellectuals, no matter how organic, and the interests of their declared constituency. As Millie noted, Michael lived and breathed Thesis 11. Philosophers have hitherto only interpreted the world. The point is to change it. And I think his students would all agree, like Millie said, he believed foremost in changing the world and in revolution than in theory for theory's sake or knowledge for the sake of knowledge. And this drives me in all that I do. Indeed, it haunts me. But it has a funny place in American sociology. I remember years ago, I got a very negative evaluation from a student in my class. They wrote, quote, "Professor Parvez's class is useless unless you want to be a communist revolutionary." And I wasn't sure whether to be insulted or to wear that as a badge of honor. I'd like to think Michael would laugh and have been proud. As Zach Levinson wrote in his tribute, quote, "Michael couldn't stand empiricism, but he was equally repulsed by theoreticism. The task of sociological Marxism, he thought, was to carefully navigate between these twin pitfalls." Another exemplary thing in Michael that I hope has influenced me was his willingness to change as the world changed. Again, this was very true to his understanding of Marxism. Although he taught his social theory class in a very particular way for decades, he came to embrace Du Bois and embarked on a whole new conversation and began changing his theory course. Before Du Bois, he had had a long encounter with Bourdieu, even enrolling as a student in Loïc Vacance's graduate seminar on Bourdieu. I was lucky to have been part of that cohort of students that debated and argued about the limits and potentials of a Bourdieusian perspective. Michael had such a deep need to understand and clarify his own theoretical lenses, and it was thrilling to share a small part of that dynamism. So let me transition a bit now to public sociology and this very difficult moment that we're in. Michael had written in 2011, quote, "Antonio Gramsci is famously associated with the phrase pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. Pessimism of the intellect refers to the structural determination of social processes, setting limits on the possible. Politics, on the other hand, requires optimism, concerned as it is with collective will formation, dissolving limits and striving for the impossible. Optimism of the will calls for pessimism of the intellect, and vice versa. They are Siamese twins." Though I had some indications, I don't know if Michael believed that the crises in the US were becoming deeper and deeper and that the contradictions would eventually ripen to the point of moving toward socialism. I don't know. But Michael was always excited and supportive of contemporary social movements, from Occupy Wall Street to the movement for justice in Palestine, something he had talked about occasionally over many years. But he would often remind us that our number one public was our undergraduates. And to the extent that we are in a Gramscian war of position, the university is inside the trenches. So raising the morale of our students, helping them see that something is rotten to the core of our capitalist system, that yes, they can and they must change the world. For those of us in education, this is perhaps our most important task. In his characteristic humility, Michael always used to say that public sociology was mainstream sociology in much of the global South, from South Africa to India, that he wasn't making a particularly new intervention when it came to advocating for the idea that our work as sociologists must be accountable to or engaged with the public. I think he was very much learning in the global South and learning from activists and sociologists in the global South. He wrote, again in 2011, quote, Public sociology cannot be the name for bad sociology. It cannot be vanguardist or populist, but must aim for a dialogue on the basis of what we know as sociologists. And the magazine that Michael founded was called Global Dialogue, and I think this is key. So we have to keep having these exchanges across the North and South, continuing to dismantle this binary towards a real solidarity that Michael so embodied in his practice. We have to keep sharing knowledge in a real multi-directional way to share our insights with communities on the ground and with social movements. We won't always agree, and for those of us ethnographers, the arguments we make may not always be what communities want to hear. But this is what constitutes a tradition. You dialogue and debate, and in that process, we move forward. Based on a 2021 essay that he wrote, my sense is that it was increasingly important to Michael that public sociology goes beyond the traditional means of writing for the media, op-eds, and radio, but to actually engage with activists and communities in what he called an organic public sociology. For me personally, this is the direction I've been moving in. There's no blueprint for how to do it, and I'm very much learning by doing, trying to figure out where is that sweet meeting spot of sociological analysis and theory and the lived realities and face-to-face communication with those most impacted by the violence and suffering that we want to fight, whether with refugee communities, migrant workers, or working class activists protesting in the streets. While Michael didn't get into the weeds of navigating those power relations or how exactly to have those dialogues, especially across the class divide, I think we can still learn from his example. And I wonder if organic public sociology, if maybe we can think of it as a process or an ethic. I think Michael would never have articulated it this way, but based on his example, maybe organic public sociology has to do with, on one hand, a commitment to science, but also a commitment to engaging people with heart and a type of moral conviction and character. So what are some parts of Michael Burawoy's character that impacted so many hundreds of us around the world, perhaps thousands? He had an openness, a belief in the intuitions of others, a kindness and humility, and a true democratic spirit. The belief that you could learn from anyone, an ethic of treating everyone with respect, from his students to the custodial staff in the building. Don't get me wrong, he could be impatient, and he had no tolerance for intellectual laziness or grandstanding. But Michael had so many publics across the global North and South, and what gave integrity to his public sociology, I think, was this ethic, his way of being. I mourn the fact that I won't be able to have these conversations with Michael about public sociology and organizing in dark times. But in my stages of grief, I think about taking all the things I loved, his humor and energy, his optimism and his ethics, and making them my own. And I think that's the journey now for all of us who were in his orbit and who were able to learn from him and take in his blessings. He wrote an extended case method. When the ground beneath our feet is always shaking, we need a crutch. And for me, it's Michael Burawoy's corpus of writings, which I consider his poetry, and his ethics, which I had the privilege of witnessing, will be that crutch. So thank you.
Thank you, Fareen. It was wonderful to hear from you about Michael and his work and his way of teaching and mentoring students and his way of perceiving the world beyond, South North binary. He was a great intellect and great human being who values human life and community. Now I would like to invite Professor Hossain to take the floor.
Thank you, Sams. First of all, I would like to very briefly say about my introduction with Michael. How do I know Michael? I came to Australia in 2002 for my doctoral research on urban poverty and marginality. I started to reading a number of materials from David Harvey to Manuel Cassell Urdu, Lok Wakam, number of things I'm reading. And I was a student of Michael Hamshe here. Michael Hamshe is a prominent sociologist in Australia, and he used to work in University of New South Wales and University of Sydney. He's Sydney-based sociologist. And he also worked in Middle East and on Palestine and Gaza and other places. Then Michael Hamshe told me about a few scholars, and one of them is Michael Burawoy. Then I started reading some of his writings. I'm talking about 2002. Then I was planning to meet Michael Burawoy. Then I went to San Francisco in a conference of American Sociological Association in 2004. And I met him for a very short meeting there because he was busy, but despite he gave me some time. But I was very excited by his lecture on Du Bois and his idea of public sociology. That was in 2004, sorry. And gradually he developed this idea. And I found one of his writings on public sociology of human rights that was published in 2006. At the time, I was about to finish my doctoral thesis, but at the end of the program, I found this writing very interesting. Then I plan to do some further research on these issues. This is my introduction with Michael Burawoy, but over the years, I followed his works and his activities because as the president of ISA, American Association, he's a key thinker and key as a particularly public sociology is his invention. It's a new idea that he started in the context of neoliberalization and undermining human rights has become very significant. I found it very important. However, today I will just briefly discuss about this idea of public sociology of human rights, and from where I am planning to do some new work in the context of Global South. In his writings, Professor Fareen has mentioned about his works on Karl Polanyi, particularly 3 waves. And that's very interesting, particularly in the first wave in the 19th century, that was labor right that prevails because of the powerful community at the time. And market was not dominant at the time, but community was dominant at the time. But in the 20th century, even before the Second World War, even the post-war period, until the 1960s, 70s, you can say market is increasingly become powerful, but still there's the control by state that Michael Burawoy addressed as social right prevail at this phase. But the problem started that in 18, particularly with the neoliberal policy introduced by Margaret Thatcher and Reagan, that not only significantly changed the North, it's also changed the South in the last 3-4 decades. And Michael Burawoy realized that public sociology of human rights should be developed in the context of neoliberal phases, because this is the phase where increasingly privatization of healthcare, privatization of education, everything's happening, and we understand the power of corporations and increasingly the huge gap between rich and poor, and money is concentrated of certain people who are controlling these corporations, and that is happening last 3-4 decades. This is the time of neoliberal transformation when the public sociology of human rights could be the very important thing that Michael Burawoy argued in his writings. That I found very fascinating. I also read other writings, but in my talk, mainly I focus how we can develop a sociology of public sociology of human rights in the context of Global South. I would like to briefly focus on Global South. What is happening in Global South in the last few decades in different continents, and what are the sociologists are doing there. And particularly, Professor Millie is working in the context of Brazil. She knows very well about Latin American context, the political context, but particularly in Latin America, what is happening? You see, neoliberalism started from from the north, but it's significantly affected other continents, including South America. And we understand the huge marginality in big cities like Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and other cities in Latin American context. And at the same time, the problem in Latin America, we understand, is democracy, democratization, militarism, and in some certain contexts, right-wing government there. So this is the and how far should this contributed in the context of Latin America? And we understand the President Fernando Cardoso, who was a renowned sociologist, was Brazilian president for 2 terms, and his own work is also very interesting, I think, to develop some sort of sociology of public sociology of human rights. And also other work in the context of Brazil in particular, I found very interesting. If we move to Africa, what is happening there? And except South Africa, it's very hard to find in other African continents very critical studies in the context of, because from the sociology living in the global South, in particular in African context, because of, I found militarism is very important and dictatorships there. And many, it's very hard to publish and write in the context of human rights justice in some countries. But definitely South Africa is very different due to the transition from after 1990 and onward. And Michael Burawoy also worked in the context of South Africa, you know. And in his writings on public sociology in South Africa, his address, the South African context is very favorable to develop a public sociology of human rights, because it's a number of contexts he has addressed there. And other significant writings I found in the context of Johannesburg, because Johannesburg has become the city of divided city. It's a divided city in terms of urban citizenship. And this issues has been addressed by a number of social thinkers, particularly sociologists and anthropologists, and also from British sociologists. One of my external supervisor in the University of, he was working in UK, she also worked in the context of South African context. And therefore, in South Africa, we found some number of studies, but in other countries, it's very difficult to find significant writings for developing this framework. That's my understanding. If we move to Middle East, what is happening in Middle East? We understand some sociologists are working in the context of Palestine. And obviously, Michael Burawoy has also worked in the context of Palestine. But I found the problem in Middle Eastern countries, Middle Eastern continent, is the last 3-4 decades, the nexus between Islam and neoliberalism. Because I found Islam has somehow embraced neoliberalism in Middle East. And instead of doing some critical studies by sociologists, it's very hard to find in the context of many Gulf countries where monarchy is continuing and lack of democracy. But one of the thinkers I found interesting in the context of Tehran, Asif Bayat's writings also in the context of Tehran, the urban marginality, and his other writings of democratization in Middle East, and where the ordinary people play the significant role, that also found very interesting for developing sociology, public sociology and human rights in the context of Middle East. If we look at the East Asia, particularly China and East Asian countries, we understand there's huge transformation taking place in Chinese context in particularly Chinese cities, and huge Chinese migrants are coming to the Chinese cities. But we find very few studies, critical studies from Chinese sociologists explaining, highlighting justice and inequality in the cities. When I understand the problem is authoritarian neoliberalism, because neoliberalism is an exception. It works everywhere, not only in the it works in China. It's very, but the question is some sort of different neoliberalism. What harvests neoliberalism Chinese character is different from other places, but it is working the same, following the same principles. But very difficult to address by Chinese sociologists the human rights issues. That's the main problem in the East Asia. And but then I moved to South Asia, because South Asia, particularly Fareen knows better about the India. What is happening in India last 3-4 decades, last 2 decades in particular. The rise of right-wing populist regime, and that limits the critical thinking of Indian scholars, because few Indian sociologists like Benadas did very significant work in the Indian context, but it's very hard to find critical writings in recent decades. Even we understand it's very hard to find sociological work in the context of Kashmir, for example, where human rights issues could be addressed there. And not only Kashmir, other Indians, how the not only the I am not talking about the minority groups, but also if you talk about the millions of people are living in slums in Delhi, Mumbai, and different cities in Calcutta, but very few studies you'll find on urban justice issues there. But I think it's a lot of issues can be addressed by sociology there. But in last 2-3 decades, limited opportunity, limited works. Maybe some activists like Arundhati Rai is talking a different way, but only she's very vocal. But how many Indian critical scholars are doing something critical work in Indian context? Thousands of Indians sociologists there. That's my observation. I want to focus a bit Bangladesh here because many participants from Bangladesh. What is happening in Bangladesh, and is it possible to develop a sociology of public sociology of human rights in Bangladesh? In the last 3 decades, 4 decades, after 1990, we are experiencing neoliberal transformation in Bangladesh. After structuralization policies by World Bank, IMF, a number of NGOs, INGOs are working there. That is the new spaces created from 1990. But the problem is huge privatization of healthcare, privatization of education is very significant, but huge inequality in the urban context, particularly in the context of city of Dhaka, where huge inequality there, we understand, and increasing gap between rich and poor. The question is, how many studies have been completed in the context of Bangladesh explaining the nexus between state, market, and society? Very few studies we can find out which address this nexus between state, market, and society. That is very, very important for developing public sociology of human rights. But there are two factors I have identified why we cannot produce any sociological work in the context of Bangladesh. First of all, NGOization of human rights. The issue of human rights has been taken by NGOs, number of NGOs. And a number of NGOs are working, they're advocating for improving the conditions. Some academics, particularly sociologists, they're working as a consultant for NGOs. Even I used to work as a consultant in a number of NGOs because it's very hard to do some academic research. Therefore, I need to do something for my survival because of the when I used to live in Dhaka to do my own research. And what I'm saying, most of some sociologists, very potential sociologists having degrees from the West, even from UK, America, Australia, but they're being engaged in some sort of consulting service, and they're mainly doing some evaluation research that do not produce any sociological knowledge. That's my understanding, because a lack of funding the university, definitely, I do agree. But the most important thing I found in the last 2 decades, particularly the authority and leadership here, authority in the state, and particularly the last regime, they controlled the country for 16 years, to almost 2 decades. And it was very difficult to do some critical research there, because we found very few potential sociologists there working in the government. Another thing, they're serving the purpose of the regime, and they are doing something advocacy for the regime, but they're not doing academic research. And few academics who try to do some critical research, who try to address these injustices in the society, even not only by the regime, also by the market, but it's very hard to talk about this, very hard to do these things. And in many cases, they are being victimized, they are being stopped in different ways by their academic research. And last 2 decades I found when neoliberalism become very strong, but we found very few studies there, few critical thinking there. Maybe a couple of young scholars, they're writing on these issues nowadays, but very limited research which address the nexus between state, market, and society. That's my experience. But I am hopeful now, because in recent time, the authoritarian regime has been removed by student movement there. but now still they are in a good shape because the present interim government is struggling to handle this law order situation. It's only 5-6 months, but I hope there will be some democratic space would be there, and this will create the new opportunity for the new academics to do some critical research, critical studies, and to critically think about the state, critically think about the market role, and increasing inequality. This will create new forms of space, public space for sociologists. And over the years, we understand the public policy has been dominated by economists, mainstream economists. They are doing everything there. And sociologists are no here. And very few sociologists, like one of them is attending our seminar, he's doing some research. He can explain, Dr. Khursed Alam, his experience there. But the problem is, very difficult to contribute in the public sector because sociologists are not doing academic research there. Sociologists are doing, they cannot influence the public policy because that is controlled by economists. Now the interim government mainly run by economists. 2-3 economists, they are doing everything from chief advisor to economic advisor to everything. The education advisor, all top economists, they're running the country. But sociologists are no everywhere. The problem is because we cannot produce any sort of academic research, but even economists has limitation. They have no economic research because very few economists they have done from political economy perspective. Most of them are mainstream economists, but they are upper hand for different reasons, we understand. Anyway, what we can do, revisioning sociology in the context of Bangladesh. And returning to Michael Burawoy, definitely we have to develop public sociology of human rights from transnational perspective, because it's not only the issue of Bangladesh issue. Now we have to connect this issue in the context of globalization, neoliberalism, and other processes. We have to understand this process. And we have to critically think about the role of neoliberalism in our life and need engagement with other disciplines. How Michael Burawoy also advocated, because it's a sociology. Of course, sociology need to address, need to collaborate with other disciplines like public health, like criminology, for example, and even law and justice, who are working from different perspectives, who are addressing human rights. Therefore, sociology have to collaborate with other disciplines. This is the way we can develop a new public sociology of human rights in the context of Bangladesh. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Shahadat Hossain, for sharing your wonderful experience with Michael Burawoy, and you probably talk about how we could develop public sociology of human rights in the context of Global South, particularly in Bangladesh. And you identified some of the factors that we need to address to connect the state, market, and society in our research. You also talk about transnational perspectives, interdisciplinary research, and how we could work together beyond the border. Now, the floor is open. I would like to go to the audience. You will get 15 minutes. So we will have a 15 minutes Q&A question sessions. This could be like question or any comment. So is there anyone who want to make comment or questions? Yeah. So Professor Dr. Khursed Alam, yeah, you can comment or raise your question. You need to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Shamsul Arifin, and I'm really thankful to Dr. Shahadat for organizing these things, particularly for inviting me. Both of you have sent me invitation. So it was nice to hear to a scholar. One is Professor Millie, and another is Professor Parvez. So just to mention one point, then I will go for making some comments. First of all, the concept of this public sociology also been elaborated by Professor Michael in 2004. As I noted. So, but the demand or feeling for the same was there even in late 70s also, because when it was found that the a debate was there whether the sociology is for the intellectuals or sociology for the common people. So there is a tendency among the people, particularly the scholars, to really, write the sociological literature for the intellectuals, making it more jargon and more critical and making more, the mathematical analysis or statistical analysis. And at that time, it was a big question whether it is going to serve the common people or not. So the common people need to understand, because sociology is basically for the common people. So that time this issue came up, and when it was also a feeling among the sociologists that the sociology is gradually losing its popularity or attention among the people. So at that time, this issue came that what kind of sociology we should have. So after that, there was some two school of thought I felt this where a group was focusing on making, the sociology for the common people, and another group was very strict to really develop sociology for the intellectuals. But certainly, Professor Michael, I think, has really took a very strong stand on that how to make the sociology what is called him as public sociology. So gradually it has developed, and he has contributed to that sector. But his most important role, as I see, is to really making attempt to popularize sociology not only to the global north but also to the global south, and we can say that all over the world. I think he is the first most known ISA president, maybe compared to others. I did not found earlier the any sociologist who was so well known to everybody. So that is his big success. That is how can a sociologist reach to everybody all over the world. I mean, those who are in the profession. I think that is his big achievement. And I think he had some, I should say that plan or, roadmap, I should say that the roadmap he had, and he tried to implement it. And I must say that he has successfully done it. So, yeah. Now the question to what remaining the both Professor Millie and as well as Fareen, as Professor Fareen has mentioned, I think still as we those who are working for sociology now, I think we need to give much thought on his work as well as one is that what are the theoretical work he has done and what else to be done or what to be continued in line of his thought. That is one issue that we need to consider. And secondly, secondly, what is his view about the improving the human society? If there is anything, I mean, if you can figure it out, I'm sure you can figure it out as he was talking about public sociology. And then did he view society as source of conflict or it is a source of cooperation? I think that is another. Since he is a Marxist sociologist, he was. So still, we can see that which one he emphasized more on, particularly on source of his, whether society is considered as a source of conflict or society is considered as a source of cooperation. Yeah, to Professor Fareen, when I wrote that one when I was listening to Professor Millie, and Professor Fareen has also mentioned a lot, and so so that there that maybe some point like that should you go for local sociology or global sociology? That debate was there always, and that I think, but his view was far as making a blending of these two. It seems to me, if I am not wrong. So I think how can we really, develop that road to globalization, road to particularly, making unified approach to that one. That can be one of the, attempt. What was his view about the demand and supply of sociological theories? That is another very interesting point that came to my mind. I think Professor Fareen can think over it. That is how he was thinking about the demand and supply of sociological theory, particularly making the public sociology. Whether what kind of demand was there for public sociology and in terms of theoretical as well, and what was the supply and where is the gap, and whether how we people can really contribute to areas, that area particularly. So I think as a follower of him, or as we are the admirer of particularly of Michael, we can still think about that, whether we can have really we can make any contribution to that side. And here's, of course, one good point that Professor Fareen was mentioning about whether the public sociology was in a form of dialogue also. And I think that was the most missing point earlier in the sociology. That, it was not really very well exercised. And I remember that Professor Shahadat was also mentioning on that point, that particularly how can we increase the dialogue and for making the foundation of sociology in every corner of the society all over the world. So I think we can do work more on that one, and I think that we can actually develop some guideline for that one. How can we really sociology can contribute in shaping the dialogue process in our society for addressing all kinds of crises. It is not merely that we should write something, publish, and somewhere in the journal and then leave it. But how to really translate it in the real life for the welfare and for the comfort of the common people. So yeah, these are the basic points that I wanted to mention about Professor Shahadat was referring. Just I would like to mention one or two points in case of Bangladesh as well. He has rightly pointed out that whenever there is any change in our regime or in our system, we see immediately the economists are, I should say, quote unquote, not taking over or grabbing. Like it is like from the outside, it may look like a grabbing something. So, but that is a big problem. We see that the problems are social, but it is always, going to be addressed by the economy. So there we find that a lot of problems here in Bangladesh that could be addressed by sociology much better. For example, during the last, movement, or quota movement, I wrote in the newspaper very strongly that it is not the matter of the government or matter of the court. It is the matter of the sociologist who has to decide who has to have what kind of quota and how to decide the quota, what should be the form of quota. But nobody listened, and so neither the court has decided. It was not within the jurisdiction of the court. It has to be settled by it has to be fixed by the sociology. Then only government can implement it. So no times, nowhere, even till today, you will be surprised to know, Fareb, that till today nothing has been attempted, in trusting any sociologists for figuring out this quota problem here in Bangladesh. Again, even the democracy is not working. Earlier also was not working, and now it is still not functioning. So, but there is no why there is no democracy is not working, or what can be done to because democracy is not the mere election after 1 year, 5 years, or 4 years. It is more important that how the people can be involved in managing the state affairs. That is almost totally absent. It is totally top down fashion we are working. And policy level also, as he mentioned, I mean like to mention about the political economies that he was referring. The political economists, you might be knowing that always they are working on aid and trade issues. The political economy in Bangladesh, they mostly work on, foreign and trade issues, that how it is affecting the country in terms of GDP and gaining other economic, achievement. But this political economy should also really touch upon the, as you were mentioning, marginal group then the the particular disadvantaged group, and the different ethnic community or disabled people. There are many issues. So those are not really been taken into consideration by our policy maker. And particularly, I would also like to mention about the participation in policy making of the country. In during the last caretaker government, the government has recruited myself also for making the national plan. So I contributed almost one third of the national plan, but that is the first time that a sociologist was engaged. But later on also again it has gone to total control of the economy. So no other sociologist was involved except only marginally, Dr. Uh, one of our department teachers, she was involved. Mahabana Singh was involved just for writing something on, climate change part with others. So that is one of the things that we see is missing. But I must say that it is also our failure because we have not succeeded to make us visible in our country, particularly in Bangladesh. In case of, making any contribution to the planning of the of the country, or any other important actions to be taken by the sociologist. So with this, I would like to stop here, and if I need to add anything more, I'll later may do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Khursed Alam, sharing your thoughts, comment, and also we got a question in the chat box which already responded by you. So I think it's not relevant anymore.
Yeah,
So do you want to, Dr. Shahadat Hossain, do you want to say anything?
just I have already responded why sociologists fail to contribute. And already I have mentioned because lack of funding in the field of sociological research. That's why sociologists often struggling to do some basic research. They are working as a consultant with different NGOs that doesn't produce any sociological knowledge. At the same time, political structure is another problem, and sometimes very difficult to do some critical research there over the years, particularly in recent decades. And due to the political structure is another problem. These two factors I have identified. I would say it's combining Marx and Weber is like neoliberalism and patrimonialism. Both are the important factors for Bangladesh. And the patrimonial state last 20 years, at the same time, a neoliberal transformation there. And very hard to analyze this process. And it could be very good study by sociologists by combining Marx and Weber in the context of Bangladesh. That's my point.
Thank you. I have a supplementary question. As you said that there are issues like how the regime, market, and other sectors combine together or restrict sociologists to produce sociological work. But the question is whether sociologists, I'm talking about Bangladeshi sociologists, whether they make adequate attempt to contribute intellectually. It's not about the structure or system that is putting you, not to work too much, but whether sociologists seem to do that kind of work. Have you seen this kind of effort by the sociologist?
But system is very important. It's you understand how people did huge effort to somehow do some research within the context. System didn't permit that sometimes because first of all you need some money for your survival, right? The salary given by university is very hard to survive for the teachers, right? Therefore, they are doing something else beyond the teaching. And at the same time, you have no funding for doing research, right?
Yeah.
University doesn't have adequate funding. And at the same time, if you are doing some academic research by your own interest, and when your colleagues are not doing these things, it's very hard to pursue. Very hard to pursue for, because if someone is not doing, you are doing, that's very difficult to do there. That's another thing. In the context of countries like Bangladesh, a number of issues there, right?
Yeah.
It's not the somehow ocean country, you are doing your work, someone to do your work. I am teaching almost I joined the University of Dhaka in 2000. And previously, I worked in another university. I started teaching in 1997 in Bangladesh, and two public universities, including two public universities, right? University of Rajshahi and University of Dhaka. I also studied in private universities sometimes, but nowadays I found better environment in private universities like Dhaka University. I was adjunct professor in Dhaka University for 1 year, but a better environment there because they're not. There's some problems in public universities there, but you cannot work there. Even you have interest, you have huge, dedication to research. Very difficult to do that. That's my own experience.
Okay, thank you. So, is there anyone who want to make comment or any question? I can see Professor Dr. Anisuzzaman. It could be great if you can say anything to the audience. Professor Anisuzzaman, can you hear us? Well,
Shall I just supplement one line?
sure, please.
To Professor Shahadat. Okay. The big issue that I see here in Bangladesh, the question is whether there is a demand constraint or whether there is a supply constraint. It is a big issue in case of sociological knowledge. The sociologist, that from the government side, they say there is no demand. And they feel that there is no demand from the sociologist. And from the sociologist side, they also always say that there is no supply. There is supply all the resources for doing the research. And so this debate or dilemma is there. So whether the demand constraint is the main issue or the supply constraint is the main issue. I think that is one of the things to be addressed by us, and we never had any detailed discussion on it, that how can really we break this stalemate situation here in Bangladesh.
So thank you. Professor Fareen raised a question. It's regarding Bangladeshi sociologists. Are there sufficient opportunities to have collective gatherings of sociologists, or are they working in isolation? So I think Professor Shahadat Hossain or Dr. Khursed Alam can respond to Fareen.
Yeah, sure. Shahadat said, yes.
Go ahead, have the quick respondent to Professor Fareen. The most problem I experienced there, sociologists are divided. In last 30, 40 years, even we could not perform our sociological association there because they are politically divided because of their material interest. Some people are affiliated with certain parties, political parties, other was involved with other political parties. Last 30 years, somehow I was, as 1990, I was a graduate student there. And 35 years, my experience is sociological association is not functioning there because of different factors. Main factor is political division there. And very hard to organize. That's why I started with a few senior professors, my professors in the University of Dhaka. We should do something by our own. We can at least share our ideas. Like, that's why when I moved to Dhaka after my postdoctoral research from University of Sydney, and I initiated this network there, and we did a few conferences there. Now we are doing some online discussion, but sociological association is not working there. This is the thing.
Sure.
You can add something, Dr. Khursed Alam.
Yeah. Well, I think you are very much correct, because when there is a ruling party, all the time we have seen a tendency to be affiliated to the ruling party from our sociologists. So a big portion is really, leaning to that one. So as a result, the other group really cannot stand alone unless the support is there from that. And secondly, as you have mentioned about the structure, because sociologists mean most of them those who are teaching in the university as a faculty. So there, one person cannot go for the association, leaving behind the other group. So that was another, the very strong, I should say, the competing situation there. So that is one of the very difficult, condition they face in everywhere in Bangladesh, in all the universities in Bangladesh. Moreover, the student politics also was a barrier, because every time there was some kind of unrest, and they had also some They also work as a pressure group, which is not been always, recorded, but they also work as a pressure group for, influencing the politics of these teachers. So that has also affected this our social development of sociology in Bangladesh.
Yeah, also, I would like to add with Dr. Khursed and Dr. Hossain. I mean, the nature of the university is very important, whether any kind of academia is developing. Like in Bangladesh, most of the universities are teaching universities and research universities yet to flourish. That is one of the reasons that, do not put faculties to engage in dialogue and discussions, and political factors, clientelism and NGOization, other things are working together. So we got a question from Millie. What is the influence of international agencies? Do they bring an economistic approach? So is there anyone interested to respond to this question?
Well, I was just reading one material today about that. One thing that in case of research and and other activities, development activities, our international agencies are also playing some role, but they basically give funding for some survey, empirical survey, rather than really developing any knowledge, solid knowledge for planning or the development of sociology itself. So that is a big thing that I have experience of working with them for last 40 years with the World Bank, ADB, JICA, Islamic Development Bank, as well as UNDP and all other international agencies. So I found that they give much emphasis on that's on the empirical work, and also sometimes they are just giving emphasis on some case studies like so that one as Professor Shahadat was trying to work on justice, particularly the social justice on that issue. We have already many human rights organizations here in Bangladesh. I think more than many other countries in number. But hardly they go only for few cases, like somebody is assaulted, somebody is killed, or something happened to one person, so they never really try to develop any system in Bangladesh. For example, now we have 4.2 million court cases in Bangladesh. So the other day I was just making a calculation that for each court case, if one plaintiff is there, so we have 4.2 million people engaged in that. Again, if it is the accused one, if it is only one person, still it is another 4.2 million people. So this in case of in such situation, almost 8 million people are running after the courts. So this is unbelievable, this thing. I mean, how out of this, 170 million, almost 8 million is running in the court. So just imagine the situation.
All political things.
Exactly. Nothing is taking place. No attempt has been given. I have clearly shown them the system that within 3 years, this can be solved, but they are not taking any action. And the reason is very interesting. That is sociological. That is, with all the lawyers, those who are running around the court, this is their source of livelihood. So they don't want to dissolve all these court cases. And also the lawyers, judges are also just helping them. So this is what has been happening here. Is unbelievable. The situation is now there in Bangladesh. Okay.
Well, is there anyone to comment, or Fareen or Millie, do you want to add anything? Fareen.
Sure. Go first, Millie, or just a couple things. I mean, I think Michael would have been very keenly watching what's unfolding in Bangladesh. I mean, and it seems like this is all the more, this is the moment where the voice of sociologists is so important. And so it's unfortunate if there's some disunity or structural conditions that they're being kind of dominated by the economists. So if you write, I think Marx and Weber, he also loved teaching Fanon, and I was thinking how this is the moment, so we always used to read about, in the aftermath of the war for independence, there were two paths, there was the bourgeois path, and then bourgeois capitalist, and then the socialist path. you know, and it was this great analysis of everything that happened that forced them down, you know, the bourgeois path, which was the fate of so many post-colonial situations. So, you know, hope and pray that things go in the right direction in Bangladesh, but, you know, we'll see what happens. And I think it also just about what you were mentioning, Dr. Alam, about increasing global dialogue and how to have those conversations. I think it's such an important moment of being able to translate what we do theoretically to everyday language, you know, and with to social movements and communities. So I think that work is also very important. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Professor Millie.
Just on what we were talking about earlier, it seems to me that economics is always affiliated with institutions of power. And so there's a lot more resources to, you know, to spread its influence. And we used to joke at UMass, where Fareen and where I taught and Fareen is still teaching, social sciences are in a 10-story building, and economics was always on the 10th floor. You know, it was sort of the social science that was given the prime location. And luckily now we're on the 10th floor, sociology. But I think that makes a difference. And you know, we can blame ourselves, and it's probably true. There's more sociologists could do, but it's also true that we often study more marginalized groups of people. We study poverty, we study racism, and you know, we don't have access to the kind of power that economists have. Let's see. Dr. Hossain's point about the importance of the sociology of human rights, I really agree about that. And then as an ethnographer, I think about, you know, how would Michael study that, or how would I, as his student, study it? You know, whether it's, you know, ethnographies of activism around human rights, ethnographies of suffering people, and then how do you study the interactions between them? And I think Michael would say that you always have to be standing somewhere. Your perspective has to be you have to be clear about from which perspective you're looking at a phenomenon like the struggle for human rights. And so I'm sure there's a lot more we could say about that, but I agree with you. I think it's you know, more and more an important thing to be studying. Let's see, Dr. Lam made a number of points. I don't want to go on too long. Well, one of the things, this idea of dialogue, I think it's so interesting how Michael Burawoy, everything he thought about was a dialogue, whether it was between theory and empirical data, or you know, a global dialogue that was rooted in local conditions, where in each country it's a different context, a different political and cultural system. And yet you can be in dialogue with theories that go beyond a particular location, as long as you never lose your footing where you are. And so yeah, I think yeah. Oh, one more thing. I think as far as the question that Dr. Lam raised about how do we continue Michael's legacy, you know, I feel we lost him it always would have been a terrible time to lose him, but we lost him in the US anyway, at a moment when we most needed his ability to analyze. And so, you know, in some ways here, you know, we still have neoliberalism, but now we also have kleptocracy. You know, we have authoritarianism. We're moving towards fascism. And so it's a whole new context for us to think about. And of course, it has ripple effects on everyone else. So yeah, I think that's where he would be looking right now.
Thank you, Professor Millie. So I think within 2 or 3 minutes, we will end up this session because it's already 1 hour 45 minutes. So before leaving, is there anyone who want to add, comment, or any question from the
Just
students?
just
Or
what
sure.
I'll take a few seconds. Just about a methodology that Billy mentioned here. I think for addressing human rights, combining ethnography and history could be one of the way to address these issues, I think.
Thank you. Anyone? So শিক্ষার্থীদের মধ্য থেকে কেউ যদি থেকে থাকেন, যদি বাংলায় প্রশ্ন করতে চান, বাংলায় প্রশ্ন করতে
I
পারেন।
think Tamanna wants to say something.
Hello everyone. I'm really impressed with this webinar. Like I really want to thank Millie, Fareen, and Shahadat sir, and all the audience to join this wonderful seminar. Like I just want to ask an kind of an elementary question to Fareen or Millie, like about the extended case method. Like I was just wondering, I know very little about Michael Burawoy, and the first day I came to know about him, it was in Fareen's class when Fareen assigned a text of Michael Burawoy for the class, and maybe the next day we heard the news of his demise, and yeah, it was a real shock for all of us. Uh, but maybe we are privileged because we have Fareen and Millie, who can we are very much privileged that we can know a lot about him from you. So I was just wondering, uh, like what is the main key point that differs like the extended case method from other traditional ethnographic method, and how like we can address when it comes to broader social factors, socio-political factors like capitalism, like that you all have discussed a lot about, but how can we incorporate all these factors with this extended case method? Like I have very limited knowledge about it, so I would love to know about it from you.
Manna, so who's gonna respond? Millie or Fareen or both?
I could say something unless you want to, Fareen.
Go ahead, and I can chime in a bit.
I think that he would say that the way we study any large, capitalism or neoliberalism or, any of the massive forces that exist is to look for their traces in a local context in the field that you've chosen to study, whether it's a workplace or a social movement, or some other situation. So, he was very much about tracing the history of how capitalism came to install itself in an institution or a group of people. So I think that would be his, to connect the micro with the macro.
And I guess I would add, I think reflexivity is very key to extended case methods. So understanding the way we intervene, or create relationships in the field, the power relations, and just being aware of our structural position as intellectuals, kind of going into the world, into these communities. he actually, if you read the book, the theme of dialogue actually runs through the extended case method, a dialogue between theories, a dialogue between intellectuals and the communities. Yeah, and I can't remember exactly how else he uses it. But it's kind of what I was mentioning in my comments that, you know, he didn't like empiricism, but he also didn't like theoreticism. And I think extended case method is trying to find kind of a middle ground. The way I sometimes would talk about it when we were teaching is, you know, the world is very messy, right? And we can't ever really know the truth about any particular case or make some sort of truth claim about the social world. But, you know, by studying a particular case and analyzing it and comparing, we get a little bit closer to what that truth is, even if we may never actually arrive at a truth, you know?
Thank you. So anyone who wants to add or comment? Well, so I'm gonna end. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining and sharing your thoughts, comment, and it was really my privilege